But without further ado, here is Carl Benjamin. Hey, Carl. How you doing?
I'm really well, thanks. How are you?
I'm good because this has been a long time coming. Obviously, we've had chats on air for a long time
Yeah,
in the past, but you've always been interviewing me,
that's true, yeah.
and now I get to interview you.
Oh, well, I'm at your disposal.
I've had a lot of comments of people saying, please have a chat with Carl, please have a chat with Carl. I'm like, what do you want me to chat with Carl about? And I think it's because you've been flirting around the topic of Christianity in a very Jordan Peterson-esque way. And people...
I've been more consistent than Jordan. Sure, but I have maintained. I'm personally not a religious man. I'm not a believer, but I respect Christianity for the things that it wants and believes, and I want to see Christianity do well. So I guess you could say, an ally. But I've never claimed to be a Christian. I'm not, and it's not a point of pride either. It's just a fact. You know?
But I think people recognize the paradox in that you see that this country cannot prosper without Christianity because that's the moral compass, that's the values that this country was built on. Yeah, at the same time, you want to subscribe to yourself. So where do you want it? How does that work?
Well, I feel like I'm kind of a disabled person encouraging people to run races. And so saying, well, yeah, but you're not running the race yourself. It's like, well, okay, but I can't run, and
no, you're more like the coach who's telling people to run the race, but you could run if you wanted to.
I don't know. I honestly feel that there's a part of me that hasn't developed in that regard. And I think it's because I'm a product of liberal modernity, right? And so, like, my parents never took me to church. To me, it's kind of alien. And so I just don't feel in that way.
But you're an intelligent man, and when you have an area in your life that you're not developed in, to use your own words, what do you normally do about it?
Oh, I'm not saying that I haven't. I've studied quite a lot of religions, actually, to quite a degree, but it's not about reasoning yourself into the position, right? It's about feeling the thing, genuinely, authentically feeling the thing, and until that happens, I'm not going to try and LARP and make it happen, right?
I was going to get to Christianity last, but I think since we're here already...
Well, yeah, we may as well go, yeah.
So, what is it you want to feel? What are you waiting for to feel?
I'm not sure, but I can see in those people who are true believers that there is something about the faith that gives them a kind of glow that comes from the inside, right? And kind of...
Is that like an epiphany, do you think?
I mean, possibly. I think for some people it probably builds up over time, and for some people it is just one of those things that just, some Paul on the road to Damascus strikes them. And I'm not trying to close myself off from any of that.
Oh, I get that.
Right? But while I don't have that, I can't pretend that I do.
Okay.
And to be honest with you, I'm not adverse to engaging with Christianity either, right? And I've had plenty of conversations about it in what I think is a respectful manner.
But I would suggest that, so God reaches people in different ways. So some people have these great epiphanies where it's just a moment of, where it's filled with the Holy Spirit and that changes their life forever. Some people have to work towards these things. And my thought would be, going to church, for example, on a weekly basis, I would say that's not LARPing. That's hoping for something, but it's an active participation. It's not passively waiting for or expecting. Have you tried engaging that way?
Well, yeah. I have to go to churches on Easter and at Christmas, which okay, is something, right?
But what's stopping you going on a Sunday?
Because I hate the local church. It's not that the people who are running it are not nice people, but they're middle class liberal women, and
Church is made up of them.
Yeah, and I'm not going to go to some foreign church, obviously, and I can't stand the unserious nature of it, frankly, right? However, Thomas has actually found a church that's not too far away from that is run by a man who is a lot more serious about these things, and so they have incense and hymns rather than like pop songs with Jesus stitched into them.
So I know the local parish church here in Swindon is an Anglo-Catholic church because I know the priest there trained with the priest that trained me. Right. So I know their sound.
Yeah, I think that's the one Thomas has been talking about, actually. So we're going to go there next time we go to a church, and I'll see how it is. And then, they have a service at 10:30 on a Sunday morning as well, which is not too bad, actually, because I'd have to be up really early.
So part of it's a commitment thing, but the thing that stood out to me was when you said I don't want to LARP, because so much of the content we do here, we're telling people we have to LARP for a while because we've got to reclaim our land. We've got to act like we're proud of it again because we want to be proud of it again, and we go through the motions until we get there. So I just find it interesting that on this issue, you're not taking your own advice.
You know, I don't feel like I'm LARPing about anything these days.
Right, because you've been doing it for so long that it's become a reality.
I'm not even sure it was a LARP when it began. Well, like I don't.
The last time you and I chatted, you were in like t-shirts and trainers, right? And we had a conversation about men should dress better. Yeah. And so now you're always dressing impeccably. But between then and now, there must have been a period of LARPing.
You know, it didn't feel like LARPing. That's the thing. It genuinely didn't feel like LARPing. Like I actually felt it was almost like a kind of homecoming. Like why was I wearing American clothes, man?
Right.
That's kind of how it felt. And so it didn't feel like LARPing when I was doing it. It felt like I'd been kind of absconding from a duty that I actually then returned to and picked up. So
not to labour the point too much, but I hope that when you start going to church on a Sunday, it will also feel like your duty as an Englishman and a father. Okay, wonderful. So let's go all the way back, because sorry, I'll unplug it. Technical issues there. Thank you. Let's go all the way back to. So you and I have crossed paths before, or we were in the same industry without even knowing each other.
Yeah.
I used to work in the video games industry.
Right.
So from 2009, I started my website, godisageek.com. So I did video games reviews. I had a team until this January when they all walked out on me because I'm the Nazi priest. Yeah. But for all this time, I had a side interest in video games. I was friends with Milo Yiannopoulos back in 2014, 2015, and prior to that. So when Gamergate kicked off, I didn't know you because we weren't in politics, or I wasn't in politics at the time.
Well, I wasn't really.
Right. But I suppose that was what nudged you into it.
Yeah.
But I would say I was probably still a bit of a centrist, right? I didn't understand what was going on. I could see that video games were becoming a bit more effeminate, and there was certainly, this is pre-woke, but there was a woke agenda being shoveled down our throats. But I didn't understand the reasoning behind it. And then, of course, you come along, and others like you, saying, feminists are taking over video games. What's going on? Yeah. And you were hounded for it, and they were cry-bullying about you. And essentially, am I right in saying that's what made you? That's what put your name out there? And
yeah, I mean, I think when Gamergate started, I had about 20,000 subscribers, but my channel had been growing quite well. Because I started with nothing, obviously. I was, I'd never...
Age of Empires 2, right?
But well, I had back in the day, but like I'd no media training or anything like that. I didn't know anything about YouTube either. Like I'd made an account in like 2010 just to subscribe to some channels to watch them, but I didn't really know anything about it. And in my mind, it wasn't an industry, right? There wasn't a career to be had on YouTube, as far as I could tell. Like I was a complete novice. I didn't create a Twitter account until like 2014, 2015. I started actually uploading videos in 2013. So I was, and I'd never done any kind of video production or anything like that at all. So I was a complete novice. But I was just really bothered by the arguments that feminists were making in order to justify essentially demasculinizing an entire industry that was made by young men. And so I was just like, well, and at the time I was a liberal, so I was just like, sort of centrist liberal. Like, why are you saying this? This is obvious prejudice against men. These are not good arguments. These are the counter arguments, and I think these hold a lot more water. And it like everyone was basically naive as to the real agenda behind what was going on. Because it just seemed like there was a series of like absent-minded interpretations of things. And then the more I started then reading sort of feminist theory. Okay, how have you got to this point? And it became evident that this was not simply absent-mindedness. This was a malevolent attempt to judo flip a liberal culture into being a highly left-wing culture. Because a liberal culture can withstand a fair amount of, and in some ways, like licenses, I guess what you could call reactionary positions in many ways, and accepts that there's a domain of human life that is non-liberal and lives in its own way.
Right.
But the thing is, liberalism is always vulnerable to being judo flipped by its own priors. into something really radical that is destined to essentially destroy every kind of human relationship. And this is what feminism was doing in the video game.
Someone would say that's the natural conclusion of liberalism.
And that's the point of it, yeah. It's the actual point of it. But most people, even if they're liberals, are not like doctrinaire liberals. Right. It's like, oh, well, yeah, it'd be nice if we all would just have some human rights and weren't tyrannized by the government.
Just let everyone do whatever they want in the four corners of their own home, kind of, yeah.
Sure. But, and you could have quite a conservative culture. In fact, we used to have a very conservative culture that overlaid, right? But then the argument about not liberalizing the culture becomes weaker when the political environment is overwhelmingly liberal.
Right.
It's why shouldn't we do that? So, well, actually, there are arguments, but you don't want to hear them. And when I make them, you'll call me names. Right. So, you'll say you're a sexist or a racist or a transphobe or something like this. Yeah. It's like, okay, those things may be true, but I'm also making good arguments that are based in reality.
But now you're well-rounded, you're wise, you've learned a lot of lessons. Back then,
I was totally.
You had this knowledge, but how did you put it across?
Well, I didn't really have the knowledge back then.
Or you were discovering it.
Yeah, I was learning. And then I'd just make videos talking about the things that they were saying and how I thought that they were incorrect. And I was called I remember the first time I was called a misogynist, I was outraged.
Really?
Yeah, I was like, how could you say that? Why would you say that?
Yeah.
You don't know me. I've got, I wasn't married at the time, but, I had a girlfriend. Like, I love my mum and my sister. Why would you even say that? But of course, that's not what they're saying. What they're saying is you're not for the unlimited power of women over men. It's like, okay, yeah, I'm not. I guess I am a misogynist then. In fact, when you put it like that, I'm for patriarchy. Right. like this is, if that's where you're going with it. But that wasn't how they frame it, and it's very cunning and it's very clever, and they know what they're doing.
I remember reading at the time. So obviously video gamers are usually, they're men's men.
Yeah.
But the video games industry has always been very different.
Well, not always, right? So, like in the early days of it, it was a hobby industry, basically, wasn't it?
Right.
And then it became sort of professionalized in the 90s.
Yeah, with HR departments and blue-haired liberals.
Yeah. And even then, that's still not the end of the world, because you can still read sort of stories of like, what id Software was like back in the 90s.
Right.
Very boys sort of company. They were driving around in their Ferraris and their, whatever, like being little terrors in ways. And it's only in the sort of latter half of the 2000s where it starts liberalizing, and that because it's become such an entrenched industry now. People have grown up with the video games industry. That's always been there. Whereas when I was young, all these things were brand new. I remember when Doom first came out, and everyone was like, "Oh my god!" Right. So it's the great edifice of the thing has been created, and then the liberals, the feminists come in and start hollowing it out from the inside, and so we're living now in the calcified shell of a hollowed out video game industry,
which can be recovered. But
of course,
but when I was in it, it wasn't as new as that. So it wasn't all men, but it was still new to the woke ideology.
Yeah.
And I remember the journalists and the developers were all on this path, because I was reading this Carl Benjamin chap, or Sargon of Aragon is that how you pronounce it?
Sargon of Akkad.
So thank you. was this massive misogynist, and I was like, okay, what was he said? And I go and look at what you say, and I'm like, but that's true. And then people are like, well, you're a misogynist too, and I'm like, how can
maybe I am?
I was raised by this is before I understood all this. So I'm like, I was raised by a single mother with my sisters. Like, I love women. I'm not misogynist. Like, the attack lines worked at that point because we hadn't been hardened by them.
Absolutely.
But they were all about cancellation. This was the start of cancel culture.
And it's back when we thought we were liberals as well.
Right.
We thought, oh, well, hang on a second. I am kind of for liberalism and people having personal freedom and stuff. I mean, but that's not what this is about. And, they knew that, the attack lines would hit you hard, and they still do. And, when Nigel Farage is called a racist, you can see he's on the verge of tears, still, even now. And it's just like, okay, man, you're never going to get over it then.
And so what was your relationship with the other people like Milo at the time?
Oh, I've been friends with Milo since Gamergate.
Right.
I'm still friends with him. I'm the one who persuaded him to come back to Twitter.
Okay.
He got his account back.
Right.
And I DM'd him, or he DM'd me, I think it was. And I was like, look, you've got to come back to Twitter. He's like, I don't want to, because he felt disgraced.
Of course.
Right? He felt that, and it was what happened to him was completely unfair. Like, there are loads of things to cancel Milo over, but being the victim of nonce is not one of them. No, don't get me wrong. Like, you could cancel Milo for plenty of stuff, but not that.
Well, some of them are nonsense. This is the problem.
Well, that's the problem. But it was cancellation from the right as well. and it's unacceptable. You know, the right shouldn't be cancelling its own, especially over a bunch of leftist attacks, and it should have learned better by now. But basically, yeah, when he got his account back, I was chatting with him DMs. Like, look, come on, you know, you'll feel better. You'll get back in the swing of things. You don't have to worry about the things that they say about you. You know, just start doing what you think is the right thing. And he's
over that now.
Exactly, he's over that now. He's doing good as well on Twitter. Yes. You know, so because he was always good at Twitter. So.
Well, I knew him when he was a technology journalist.
Yeah.
Just talking about Web 2.0 stuff. So it's certainly come a long way to advising President Trump. Kanye West against President Trump.
Yeah.
It's a funny old world.
Yeah.
Anita Sarkeesian.
Yes.
What's your relationship with her now?
I don't really have a relationship with her.
Have you spoken to her since all of this?
I've never spoken to her. She called me a garbage human once, but I've never like had a conversation with her. Which I would happily have a polite conversation with her. You know, like
that'll be interesting. All these years later.
Yeah, it would be interesting.
It's over a decade now, isn't it?
Yeah, but the thing is, I think people confuse me with Thunderfoot. Because Thunderfoot is the guy who made video after video after video after video about
her specifically.
Yeah, I probably made like, you know, probably 6 to 8, maybe 10 videos over the course of like 6 years or something, right? So if she did or said something that was particularly important and was in fact affecting the discourse, then I would make a video about her. But like, you know, I'm not going to go after a series over and over and over. That was actually Thunderfoot. I think people forget that that's him, not me. I think she thought I was him when I was at the VidCon.
I think any line of attack that they think.
Yeah. But it would be interesting because I made my first video in response to her video,
right?
And it was again like very naive, very poor quality, and I didn't know what the scope of what they were asking for was. Right? No one did. But I've no idea what she's doing now. To be honest, I don't know. She never comes up in any conversations. So I have no idea.
Some of these people weren't actually involved in the video games industry, though, were they? They were just kind of sniping from the outside. So that was part of the problem. I understand you were, and we've got on screen here one of your projects from back in the day that you wanted to actually create your own video game.
Yeah, I'd made like demos of a bunch of games, and I wanted to make something. And basically, I was working with a friend and a couple of other guys, and our parents had basically helped us fund this.
Yeah.
There was too much going on at the time, though, because it was the sort of, as you can see, the last update was in 2016. It was the same time as my sort of YouTube career was taking off.
Yeah.
And they all had things that we were doing as well. So it kind of fell through. Right. So I ended up refunding the backers, which was my parents mostly. But we weren't even asking for a lot of money, actually. It was £8,000. That's a very small amount of money now I think about it, you know, in retrospect. But then we had nothing at the time, you know. We were absolutely impoverished. But yeah, I did, you know, I'd love to do it at some point, but there's just no way I can find the time.
It's a labour of love that doesn't really have much of a revenue return, does it?
I mean, I've got a large enough audience now, so maybe I could make something that'd be quite successful, but like I just don't have time. It's too much going on. And I would have to go and relearn how to code. It's been a while since it's been like a decade since.
What were you coding on?
Oh, just in Unity.
Okay.
So, you know, nothing too complex. But I'd get some programmers if I was going to do it now.
I don't blame you.
Just be a designer now. Too old.
Still, it'd be good fun to make your own video game.
It would be nice, yeah. It would be nice.
And so you cancelled this, but you had in the background your Patreons going on. You had people subscribing to you, and your platform's growing, and this became a career. This became your job.
Yeah, it became a career out of nowhere. I had no idea. Like, I used to work just in offices around here, just doing website updating or whatever it is. Just fairly not just low level tech jobs really. I wasn't really doing anything. So I was working on this. This was what I wanted to do is make a nice video game, right? And I had to learn how to do that while I was doing it. But I'd lost my job because of feminism, actually. And the thing is, at the time, I didn't realize it was feminism. Because I was working at the research councils over here. And I was just website fixer, basically, and updater. And all of my bosses were women. And the person who ran the department was a woman. And this was in like 2012, 2013. When feminism was first coming into the business environment. And they were holding a sort of a women in leadership thing. And I was just like, why would you need that? All of my bosses are women.
Yeah.
why do you need women in leadership? If you're not, I didn't say this, but the implication, like, but I was like, well, isn't that discriminatory against men then? And they were like, oh yeah. But from that point onwards, I could see that. Looking back now, I could see I was a marked man, and eventually it was just like, look, we just like you to go, and I was like, oh, okay then. So I'd become unemployed. I was working on this, and I didn't know about feminism. I didn't think about feminism at the time. So for me, it was just like, right, that was a weird thing. But okay, I'll work on this in my free time. But because I was, paying attention to the video game industry, suddenly Anita Sarkeesian with her tropes versus women and stuff like this were suddenly the thing that everyone was talking about. And I wanted to talk about it too. So I had a YouTube channel that I was subscribed to a bunch of other channels on. And so I made a really bad video in response and uploaded it, and then the thing just started growing. And I was just like, right, okay, and now I've got a lot of trouble behind me.
What a world that was before feminism, before woke, before all of this stuff that seems to be everywhere, every day of our lives. I know, obviously, we work in it, but still, it feels like it's all encompassing.
But it is. I mean, we get messages from subscribers all the time who are just like, I do something really trivial, and we've got a Black Lives Matter thing, like in 2020 and 2021. Like, my mum works like a disabled person's home in Cornwall, and they were getting, George Floyd, Black Lives Matter, and it's like, how many black people do you think are in Cornwall? Like, there are no black people around for her to do Black Lives Matter things with, and yet they got the messages. So it's like, it really is everywhere, and it really is, being forced upon people.
Right. And so this became your main job. You started to make a lot of money from it. And you said you came from a background without much money. How did that impact you?
It was unusual. I mean, before doing this, I'd never had any money. My dad was a sergeant in the RAF. My mum, when me and my sister were old enough to not have to require childcare from her, worked part-time as a cleaner, or whatever, on RAF camps. And a sergeant in the RAF in the 90s was paid something like 25 grand. Like, it was not a lot of money. Things were cheaper back then, obviously, but not that much cheaper, But even the way, it's not a lot of money. However, we always lived in, like a 3-bedroom house, because the military would give you discounted rents on houses, right? So it was a very sort of lower middle class life. But my dad began his life in a caravan with 2 other brothers, and eventually got a council house, and he had 5 brothers. My mum has 5 brothers and sisters, and so very, working class Southwest success stories. I mean, they worked really hard. My dad joined the RAF mostly as a way of getting a guaranteed career to get out of poverty, frankly. I went to university, did computer science, hated it, dropped out in my second year because I was just like, I just don't want to do this, and so I just worked in.
Where was that?
Coventry.
Okay.
That's where I first met a Muslim.
Oh, really?
I had no idea what Islam or Muslims were, and I didn't even think about it.
And something that's also everywhere now.
Yeah, exactly, right? Like, I remember just on the course, I met one guy there, and I was like, oh, how's it going? We were talking about it. He's like, I'm a Muslim. I was like, I blanked. I had no idea what that was, right? So I just had no interest in any of that sort of stuff, and so I was just like, right, okay. What and he explained to me it was a religion. I was like, oh, okay, I don't know anything about it, I don't care about it. And then he started dealing me drugs.
Interesting.
So yeah, he was a weed dealer. But yeah, so that's where I first sort of got any experience of that. But even then, it was not really anything. It was just like these guys weren't very religious or anything. It was again more of a felt identity than a religious practice.
And still, it was an identity that was different to yours, and that must have been the first time you had,
Yeah. First sort of proper, like, but even then, it wasn't something I thought about, right? It's because this is like 2001, so there's far fewer of them. It wasn't a big issue. But the computer science degree, I found it very easy, but I found it very boring. I'm the only person I knew that passed the first year without having to take any resits, for example. But it was just really boring, and I just didn't want to do it.
I also did that. I can relate.
It was awful, right? It was really, really dull.
It wasn't good fun, no.
No, and I was like that. I wish I'd known about philosophy when I was young, but the thing is, like, no one in my family knew anything about this because we came from just very normal, like, working class families. There were no intellectual pretensions in my families, right?
And I do want to get to philosophy, but let's side shelf that for now. Because I imagine you got into computer science because you're a gamer, and it was obviously
it was literally I just was competent at it, right? Yeah. Because when you were growing up in the sort of late 80s, early 90s, hardware and software were not user friendly,
right.
So you had to learn how they worked if you wanted to get them working. So, for example, I remember the first computer my parents ever got was a 386 with 4 megabytes of RAM, theoretically enough to run Doom.
Right.
However,
with a floppy disk.
Right. However, you had to was it Command EXE or something like that, Command INI. I can't remember what the file was now, but you had to do something with the file to free up enough memory for it to be able to run Doom, because the system itself would take up a percentage of that you needed to unload. And so I had to learn how to do that to be able to play Doom on my parents' 386. And when I got 486 that could actually run Doom, because it had 8 megabytes of RAM and it was 66 SX, I was just like, this is incredible, and I was thrilled. But the point is, you had to learn how these things worked, right? And so, computer science was just, I had a decent working understanding anyway. And so then, after then I spent some time doing technical support. I built laptops, repaired laptops, did, website stuff. Yep. And it was just, I was just existing and working on thinking about something, doing something creative.
Right. You fell into it until you found something you were passionate about, and then you started making money doing things you're passionate about, and then you're living the high life until you get cancelled from all of those things.
Well, I mean, I don't even know if I'd consider it living the high life. Like, I was.
So what did you do with all the money you suddenly had?
Well, I didn't have.
I read reports you were on like 12 grand a month at one point.
Yeah.
That's a lot of money, Carl.
Yeah. So when I first started my YouTube channel, I was single and poor, right? Very poor, and living in a £500 a month 1-bedroom flat in Swindon, right, near Farringdon Park in Swindon. And I was making YouTube videos in my just in my front room, right? And I was single and I was just getting on with life. And then I dated the woman who's now my wife, like on and off over the years, but we never made it work. And for some reason, I looked her up on Facebook, and she was single, and I was like, oh, I still liked her. So I messaged her, and she started talking to me, and she was living in Wales at the time, in Pontypridd. And so we met up and we started dating again, and then she fell pregnant with my first son. And so during that time, I'd got, maybe like 5,000 or 6,000 subscribers, something like that. But by the time like Gamergate had started, we were in a proper relationship. But like, I don't know, I probably only had like 50, 60,000 subscribers, something like that, probably less than 100,000. But it was enough to pay the bill. So it was, a couple of grand a month. Right. So it's fine, that's a good amount of money, especially, but it wasn't like huge amounts of money. And then had my first son. By that time, I'd got about, 200 to 300,000 subscribers, something like that. And so I was making probably 4 or 5 grand a month, which is, again, it's good, but it's not like millions. I was never good at monetizing my channel. I never ran any adverts or anything, right? If I was an American capitalist, I would have been making a lot more money than I was making. But it was enough for me to live on comfortably, obviously, and with my new family. And so we ended up, we moved in together, obviously, got married, which cost money, and then just ended up buying a house. And so that's basically my money went on my family.
Yeah, as it should.
Well, yeah. I mean, I'm not.
Yeah, that's a nice way to do it, because a lot of people would have bought sports cars and splashed it around and had nothing to show for it.
Yeah, I'm not an opulent guy, so I didn't buy any sports cars or anything. Right. We just bought like middle class houses, which cost a lot of money in England now.
Right.
So yeah.
And so when you got cancelled from YouTube and Twitter and Patreon,
so I was never really properly cancelled. I was cancelled from Patreon because I said a naughty word, and they were like, "Right, that's it. It's a good excuse." I was never cancelled from YouTube. And I was.
He's learned his lesson because he didn't say the word. You noticed that?
Yes, that's very true. I did learn my lesson. And I had my Twitter account suspended because I was just arguing with some Nazi online.
Really?
Yeah, and they were like, "We don't like the way you've talked to that Nazi." And so when Tim Pool was on Joe Rogan, being like, "Okay, why did he get suspended?" They were like, "Well, look, he'd said this to this Nazi." It's like, Well, sorry, but thankfully Elon brought me back, so thank you, Elon. And then YouTube remonetized me the other day, well, a couple of months ago.
Oh, really?
Yeah. So that sounds good. So I never lost my YouTube account. But the Patreon is still the thing I don't have. But I don't need that now. So
there are alternatives to that now.
Well, that's one of those ceases.
But did it impact you at the time?
Yeah, absolutely. Because it was, a couple of grand a month. I can't remember how much it was offhand, but but
that's the power they wield.
Oh yeah, absolutely. And they're not shy about using it either. No. The demonetization from YouTube was way more painful. To be honest.
Okay. Well. So, obviously, you're a gamer, talking about games, you got dragged into politics because of the feminazis, and then you find an interest in politics, or at least to some degree, because you start making more political content.
Well, yeah, it becomes everything. You realise that everything has been politicised, right? Because for something, the only areas of life that are non-political are areas of mutual agreement, right? And so if there's a disagreement over a particular area of life, that's a political area now. And you realise that if you have a left-wing movement that renders everything to be controversial and wants to change everything about life, well, all of society has been politicised then. Right. And so everything now is political, whether you like it or not. And it's actually out of your control to allow it to not be political.
You either go with the flow or you fight it.
Exactly. So you either capitulate or you resist. And so I'm far too egoistic to capitulate. So I was just like, no, okay, well, we'll have it out then.
Resistance is futile, though. You know this.
I don't agree.
They are like the Borg.
Yeah.
The liberals, in a way.
I don't know. I think they can be beaten.
But you stood for not Parliament, for European Parliament.
Yeah, that was really just a way of getting them to understand we're not happy. Because, people who don't remember, basically there's a huge institutional push to overturn Brexit.
Yes. Over
and over and over and over. And it had been going on for years and years and years. And when it came, there's things every 4 years they have their MEP elections.
Yeah.
And the fact that, 4 years after Brexit, we were voting in MEP elections. Yeah. Sorry, what are you doing? Right. This is unacceptable, isn't it? And so, Dank was like, should we run for MEP? And I was like, sure, why not? It'd be funny. But I ran as good a campaign as I thought I could run anyway, but
it's a hard game.
It is a hard game, yeah, and it's cruel as well.
I didn't realise Dank was standing as well.
Yeah, he I think he saw what was coming my way and was like, I think I'm going to be a bit more quiet about mine.
So you two were friends by that point?
Yeah. In 2016, he'd been defenestrated for his Nazi pug joke.
Gosh, that was that long ago.
It was that long ago. And the thing is, I remember watching the video and being like, I know exactly the kind of guy this is. Yeah. This is like one of my stoner mates. Yeah. It's just like he's having a laugh. He's not
good time.
He's not a political guy. He's not trying to be political. He's just having a laugh.
Isn't that funny? Ha! No, that's not funny. You're a Nazi now.
Yeah. Now millions of people are coming down on you and you're cancelled from everything. And it's like, oh, for God's sake, right. And so yeah, I came out in support of him quite quickly, and we ended up talking. He's a really nice chap. He's a really decent guy, and so we've been friends since then. I went to his wedding and he got divorced. And it's like, Jesus Christ, Anyway, wholesome. But yeah, no, really, really good mates with him, and really glad he's doing well, frankly. Yeah, so that was. You
got a taste for the political life, and you didn't want any more of it. You weren't enticed into it.
Not really. I did have a lot of fun on the campaign, though. I have to say, it was really entertaining. Milo actually joined me for a couple of the campaign stops because he was in America after being exiled. I was like, look, screw it, you just come over, I'll pay for the flights and we'll just have some fun doing these campaign events. And they went great. They went really, really great, and everyone had a good time, I think. So I did really enjoy doing it. But it's a lot of hassle, a lot of stress. And my wife's like, oh, don't do that again. I'm like, how? So
I actually prefer the campaign to everything else in politics. It is good fun, but running is not good fun, and the attacks you take are not good fun, and it's not nice to on your family.
Yeah.
But it's important that people do it, and good people do it. And you and I were talking just before the show of people that we know and love that are doing good stuff, but there are different ways they could be doing it. And my stance is always, well, DIY. And I've been saying this to you for a while now. I'd love to see you stand. I'd love to see you run a movement, because you have all the ideas, but you keep giving them to people and people aren't taking them on board. Eventually, you're going to have to do it yourself.
I guess we'll have to see.
That's such a political answer.
I'm 45. I've got plenty of years.
You do have plenty of time. All right. And so from politics, you move into philosophy, you start studying again, which can't be easy when you're running a business and you've got a family.
Yeah, well, I started doing the philosophy degree in, I think, 2019, after I'd done the MEP campaign, because I just wanted to have a better understanding of my own thought process, frankly. And it struck me that, I mean, really is, philosophy is genuinely the wellspring from which all of the bad decisions we make flow.
And it wasn't to get better attack lines and kind of to formulate your argument.
Oh yeah, all sorts of things, just to be able to more properly understand the way that the intellectual landscape was laid out, and to better diagnose what the issues were. Because the thing is, prior to any kind of philosophical training, and this is genuinely the sort of thing that children used to have, like we don't have it these days. You can see it in debates now, where the kinds of arguments being made just become muddled and overlaid on one another, and not properly disentangled. And that's why I thought, okay, I'll do the philosophy degree so I know exactly what I'm talking about in this. Now I'm doing a master's degree in philosophy.
You're enjoying that better than you enjoyed your computer science degree?
Way more, yeah. I actually want to do this. And it's actually very useful as well. So yeah, no, I really enjoyed it. Finished that in 2024 because I was doing it part-time. Was it 2023? I think 2023 I finished in.
Back in the day, philosophy and theology were the serious subjects that every man would have studied.
Yeah,
they could have gone on to do other stuff, but they were what they would have studied first. Because it's how you see the world and how you interact with the world and why the world was here for.
Oh yeah, I mean it used to be such a core part of education that they had the trivium, which is basically essentially the foundation of critical thinking skills, and that's why I did it. So
would you go on to do theology as well?
I probably wouldn't, no. Okay. I'm not that interested in religion, to be honest.
But it's not necessarily religion. It's why we have the world. So philosophy is how we make it work, but theology is why we have it in the first place. The why is always important.
I agree.
And so I understood that you learned philosophy so you could take down people like James Lindsay. This has been the ongoing battle in recent months, at least.
It was more just to take down liberalism itself. Well, actually, when I started the degree, I thought, right, I really wanted a better understanding of liberalism, so I could more properly argue for it. Because at the time, because at the time I was a liberal, and I thought this seemed fine. I agreed with the liberal principles. In retrospect, I'm English, so of course I agree with them. Because in essence, is kind of formalization of English political life. Right?
Well, even when I first met you, I think you were still calling yourself a classical liberal.
Yeah, and I thought I was. But then, after having to do the degree, you have to really go back into the liberal canon and understand exactly how this thing is built up and why it does what it does. And then I realized, right, okay, I'm absolutely not a liberal, because it's set on a foundation of prior assumptions that are just not correct about human nature and what the original men are like, and it's just like, this is not true. And then when you look at it, you realize the destination is also deeply unappealing, right. And so
unrealistic.
It's not just unrealistic. Even if it were to be achieved, it'd be an evil thing, right? Which is the complete. Basically, liberalism is aiming at the atomized technocracy, and it always has been. Where like no person is reliant on another person, but they could be completely reliant on the system.
Right.
And that actually seems like hell on earth to me. I'd rather be reliant on my friends and family than the government. And that's when I realised, I'm definitely not a liberal.
But a lot of people crave the Matrix. A lot of people want to be reliant on it.
Unfortunately, they do, and a lot of people just have to be forced not to be free.
So what do you say to people who say, look, I'm not these modern liberals, I'm the old-fashioned liberal, we're the good ones?
So
it's too much to break down there.
It's a long conversation, but basically the easiest thing to say is, okay, on what part do you actually philosophically disagree with them? And the answer is they don't. Right? They agree that actually freedom consists in freedom from one another, not just freedom from the state. And it's like, okay, well, I don't agree with that. A good way to address it is like, oh, well, they're free to do what they want in the comfort of their own homes or whatever, in their own bedrooms. It's like, right, so if, two German guys get together and one mutilates the other's penis and then eats it, right. You're just like, yeah. And that has no reflection on their broader character. When they leave that bedroom, they're just as normal. It's like, no, right? You are not a different person in these two areas. Your character is the same character. And if, you do in private terrible things, I'm actually entitled to make judgments about that.
But then we come back to the beginning of the conversation, like, what's a terrible thing? It's just another word for evil. How do we define good and evil without that objective compass?
That is indeed a much broader conversation.
Yeah, but how do you? Because let's go stick with freedom. Let's not go back to religion. Well,
I'm happy to rest on sort of traditional views that I will concede are fundamentally rooted in Christian beliefs. Yes,
because even James Lindsay will say, "Look, I believe in the Logos," but he won't define who the Logos or what
of course
is. Right? We have to have something to pin it to, and obviously the liberal argument of freedom makes a lot of sense. But from my perspective as a Christian, I would say our freedom is actually submission to God and His good order. So I know within those boundaries, whatever I do is good. Outside those boundaries is evil.
I actually really like C.S. Lewis's concept of the Tao. The universe is something in objective relation to the things that we are. Yeah. And so there is an order that is baked into reality that we are morally obliged to follow.
Right.
Now, obviously, C.S. Lewis and yourself would say, "Well, God created the way," and fair enough. I'm not even interested in challenging that.
Right.
It doesn't really matter where it came from. Ultimately, it just is. Yeah. And so, all of the kind of perverse attempts for feminism to overthrow men from the head of the household, for example, no, I think that's just wrong. And you can see examples of where someone does this, and you can see the unhappiness that they end up living with. Like, it's the sin from a sort of rationalist perspective. They'll say, well, sin is an irrational thing. It's like, yeah, it might be, right, but it's also like, even if you wanted to take a kind of the deconstructionist position of religion, right, sin still is a useful concept in that through the sort of Burkean accumulation of tradition and wisdom, what the concept of sin is telling you is that there are people who have tried this lifestyle. There are people who have been down this road, and it ends badly for them. And they end up when it's if as an atheist you want to be like, well, hell's not real. It's like, no, not maybe literally real, but metaphorically that person's living in hell.
Creating it.
Exactly, they're creating it for themselves. Whereas if you follow the path of righteousness, you end up with an existence you're at least happy to be in. And you don't hate every day, and sometimes you'll sit back and go, no, I'm really happy with my life.
It makes sense.
And so even if you're not like a diehard believer in the metaphysics, there's still genuine value in it.
And I raised James Lindsay not because I want to talk about him, but because of what he represents right now. Yeah. And I like James Lindsay as a person.
I do as well. I met him at ARC, and for the first time, and the thing is, it was really funny because we're very similar in many ways, and we've been on the same sort of journey in many ways, and we're both quite clever chaps, and so when I have a conversation with him, like he was like, look, I found him very edifying to talk to, but I just disagree with him on this. It's like that. I felt the same, James, right? But the thing is, he's holding on to liberalism as the only moral standard he has left.
Sure,
right? And actually, there are other moral standards that I
can recommend one.
And like the traditional moral standards of Western civilization, again, like I'm always careful to not lean into religion when I'm trying to talk to people who I know aren't religious or aren't necessarily receptive to it, right? Because I think it kind of unnecessarily muddies the waters a bit, because they rather than having the argument you want to have with them,
it goes to
they're having the new atheist argument, and it's like, oh, come on, that's not. It's not an argument you're going to resolve, right there. But you can definitely resolve the argument of, okay, well, traditionally, actually, is it more sensible to lean into our natural habits and natures, or is it that we should try and overthrow them and reformat the entire world to be something weird, and men can become women, and actually there's no such thing as England and the English people? Or should we accept that, the man should be the breadwinner of the house? You are a citizen, you're a member of, you're an Englishman, you should act like you own your civilization, you carry it with you, because you do whether you like it or not, really. And so all of these things that are much more natural, they just feel right when you're living in them.
It's an argument that won't make much sense to someone who hears the word natural and thinks that's bigoted. Their paradigm has shifted so dramatically from where you are.
Well, you got to kind of own it, actually. I'm being prejudicial about this. I have a prejudgment based on the sort of collective wisdom of the ages, and I'm not the person who's going to mutilate my own body. Right. I'm not the person who's fallen down that, whatever terrible rabbit hole. I don't have a porn addiction. I don't smoke drugs. I'm basically teetotal these days. The only vice I've got is smoking. like cigarettes or cigars. That's the only vice I've really got left. Which I need a vice. I need some vices.
I think cigars are a good one. Pipes.
Yeah. I tried a pipe, but I couldn't get on with it.
Okay.
But the cigars I do like.
You can get a Common Sense Crusade pipe. They're very good.
I appreciate it.
But it's not just James Lindsay's personal liberalism. I wanted to touch on the whole woke right thing, because I think that's dangerous, because we fought with these liberals, right, for a long time. When they realized how bad liberalism it really is, they joined our camp for a while. And now they're realizing on a personal level they've left behind their values. They're hanging on to whatever they can. Yeah. But at the same time, they're attacking us now and trying to cancel the right.
Fundamentally, they're not right-wing. That's the issue. And a coalition is always a marriage of convenience.
Yeah.
As in, we're both being attacked by that same person. Well, the enemy of my enemy is my friend. Right. Until James Lindsay pops up and goes, actually, you're evil too. It's like, oh, okay, well, I guess the coalition's over then. Yeah. Basically, they are liberals and they have to go back to the left. Right, it's the same with Elon Musk. Frankly, it's not. I like these people, and I understand where they come from, because I was exactly there 10 years ago. But if they're not prepared to engage in any kind of intellectual curiosity and development, then ultimately we just have to say, well, then we're not allies, right? Then actually you want something different to me, because what I want is to set a righteous order that my children can grow up safe and happy, and then my wife can go to sleep comfortably in the evening, knowing that everything is fine. And actually, they're not going to help create that. Right. Actually, they might be an impediment to that. Okay, guys, we're not on the same team anymore. If you've got some bad arguments, I'm happy to hear them.
So all of this is like a really, really sound articulation of where you stand, what you believe, what you're fighting for. And that's come a long way from where you started.
Oh, yes.
So you've got some personal growth, as one would hope one has. As one
you would hope so, yeah.
However, we all occasionally fall into these traps. And one of your most recent traps was the Jess Phillips comment.
Oh, that was a fair few years ago now.
Okay.
I mean, that was the 2019.
Yeah.
So it was before the substantive amount of personal growth that I think I've gone through. At the time, I didn't really think I was famous, right? Because you don't feel famous when you're making videos in your front room.
Right. Yeah.
Okay, you might have 400,000 subscribers or whatever I had when I made the joke, right? But it doesn't sound, it's numbers on a screen, right? It doesn't mean anything. I'm just there in my office making videos. So,
what does it matter what you say?
Exactly. It's all just numbers on a screen, right? And it was only when I went on the MEP campaign that I realized that it's not just numbers on a screen, right? Because it feels very, very abstract, but it can come back to you very, very quickly. And so I did go on GB News and apologize for that.
You got all the headlines. So it must have been a realization that your opinion does matter, at least to the raving libs, the Guardian, the Independent, and BBC. Now, you mentioned you went on GB News and apologized.
Yeah.
When I was working for GB News, I wanted to get you on to have this conversation to see if you wanted to show any contrition and repentance, and I thought that'd be good for you, that'd be good for your followers, that'd be good for all of us.
Yeah.
GB News said no. They said he's on the blacklist. I'm like, is there actually a blacklist? Can I see this list? I was never allowed to see the list, but there was a blacklist.
You know who's on it.
Oh, we know who's on it. You,
Katie
Tommy
Hopkins.
Robinson, Katie Hopkins, anyone that has any ounce of common sense. That is seen as too much, or has too much of the common sense. And so something's changed there, if you were able to get on.
Yeah, so I was out, it was 2024, I was at NatCon, and Stephen Edgington was there. And
good lad.
Yeah, a very, very good chap. And he suggested it, that if I want to talk, because I've been talking to him, I was worried, actually, because at the time, what was happening in the election is that Jess Phillips was getting some pretty serious harassment and abuse from the constituents of her constituency. So, I mean, like, for example, can we change that? It keeps moving. It's distracting.
Sorry.
So, for example, like, Jess Phillips, I don't think ever felt personally threatened by anything I said to her, right? No. I was very disrespectful, but it was obvious that, we're just... This is English democracy just being English democracy, right? Okay, you don't like what he said, she doesn't like what you've said, whatever. it was obvious that I was never going to do anything to her.
Sure.
Right? And no one ever even...
There's no incitement there at all.
Well, exactly. And no one ever suggested that I would. All the complaints against me, that I was being very rude, right? And I was very demeaning. And that's true. I was rude and demeaning.
Well, your comment, which, to be clear, you said, I would not even rape her, talking about Jess Phillips, is very similar to what Lawrence got fired for.
It is. And it is a very rude thing, right? It is a very rude thing. But
it's a negative statement.
It is. So there's no incitement there, and there was no, nothing. I don't have a criminal record. Nothing has ever come of this. But it was really, I was just being very rude. But the 2024 election in Birmingham Yardley revealed something quite dark that underpins British politics now, which is that Jess Phillips probably is physically in danger to a certain degree.
Oh, yeah.
But not from gamers online.
Oh.
She's
a whole new demographic.
From a whole new demographic that she's been trying to court, and is in the next election she's going to lose her seat to this demographic.
Right, but still, not
she only won it by something like 500 votes in the last one to a Muslim Gaza independent MP, and then she got harassed by a bunch of Muslim men at the whatever the ceremony is called where they swear them in,
which is awful. But who does she blame for that?
Well, yeah, I mean, I'm not saying...
She blames men.
Yeah, I'm not saying that she has the correct interpretation of what the problem is, but the issue is, I mean, she had her tyres slashed when she was campaigning and things like that. It's like, okay, that is a serious intimidation. And then when she was actually at the end of the count or whatever, they were just yelling at her in a really, really, really aggressive way. And honestly, I was watching it thinking, Christ, she could literally end up dead one day. Yeah. And it's not like we don't have evidence of it happening. Right. David Armes, or Joe Cox, even. Like it's not that this is actually off the table. So basically, back in 2019, it was a very different political environment, right? And then in the last 5 years, it's utterly soured. And just sectarian violence is coming into British politics, and I was genuinely concerned about it. Genuinely concerned, because I really, it just felt like it was the right time. And Stephen was like, "Look, do you want to do a thing talking about this? If you want to apologise, we can do it on GB News." I was like, "Yeah, okay, go on." And so I did, and I explained all this. And look, I'm genuinely worried. I personally had matured a lot in those intervening 5 years as well, realising my position on the political map, because again, when you're just a YouTube channel, you don't think you have a position on the political map, right? But they think that you do, and you don't realize that you do occupy something, and that, almost all of what they do is just words anyway. So actually, if you've got 800,000, 900,000 followers on YouTube, that's a huge place on the political map. Yeah, exactly. And I just hadn't thought of it that way. So when Stephen Edgerton was like, "Look, should we do this?" I was like, "Yeah, we can." So went and did it, and I just basically said the sort of thing I was saying now.
I think it's great that you did, and I think it's great that Steve got you on. I'd love to know how. The head of TV themselves told me that I couldn't get you on, but I had my own show, I couldn't do it. So,
but I've been on there. I've been on there 3 times now.
Excellent.
So Stephen Edgerton's a wonderful gentleman.
Oh, absolutely. And I hope he goes for not that. Yes. Anyway,
I think he's got a good future ahead of him.
Yes, whether GB News does or not. So from classical liberal to conservative, you get involved in uniting the kingdom, the Tommy Robinson rallies, which take part in London. So this is more cultural than political. This is rallying the troops because something's going to happen. In fact, this is what launched reform. This is what got Farage back into reform. These uniting the kingdom rallies.
I think it was probably a combination of that and also the poll that came out in Clacton. That, saw him in the lead, but you could see that there's momentum building. I think Tommy did a really great job of these rallies. They all went great. They've all done really, really well. And we did one even when he was in jail because it was like, look, it's no excuse to stop, right? But I completely support it. We need a large and confident social movement that's going to assert ourselves against all of those forces that are trying to destroy us. We need this, right? And it was a real morale raiser because the first one they kind of ignored, but the second one was really big. I think the second one was maybe the third one was the one in Trafalgar, but that was really, really big, and it was full of women and children, right? And that was when Davy Starkey was like, "Look, if it was just the lads coming out for a day out, you can ignore it, but when the women and children are there as well, and that was one Michelle Dewberry went down to, and she was like, well, feels fine. You know, this isn't like a far right rally. This is just, you know, basically a festival almost, you know, and that's where, like, you know, and everyone really pulled their weight. Everyone did a really good job. You know, no trouble, and it was just massive, and it was amazing.
Good. Well, more of that. I personally think that's the way we're going to change this country, by shaping the culture. The politicians are a lost cause, whether they're on our side or not. Yeah. There are none of them that are willing and able to do what needs to be done.
Yeah, so absolutely. Farage isn't going to do anything.
I did tell you this a few months ago, and you were quite optimistic about it.
I was, but I mean, it didn't take very long for him to show his colours, did it? You know, he's one of them, and he's not going to change.
No, we've been spurned too many times. Yeah. And how about your family? Where do they sit in all of this? Are they supportive of your career? Are they supportive of your politics?
Yeah, I mean, my wife was always way more far right than I was.
Okay.
So back in the day, you know, she's not like a philosopher or anything, but she's always got that sort of working class gut instinct when it comes to English politics and just English people, where it's like, oh, this guy's a murderer. Well, we should hang him then. And I was always like, and I was always like, no, you know, and I'd trot out the liberal rationale for, no, we can't just hang people. Yeah. And now I'm just like, well, he should be hanged. And my wife's like, see, I was right, wasn't I? I was like, yes, darling, you were right.
We can just hang people.
Yeah, exactly. And we should just hang people. Yeah. So yeah, good to see Rupert Lowe supporting that with Restore Britain.
Thank you for watching my Common Sense Crusade. If you'd like to watch the whole show, you can subscribe to lotuseaters.com for as little as £5 per month, and then you get access to a bank of content as well. My show is 3 p.m. every Thursday. See you there. Deus Vult.